Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to the Italy or Monza post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? Did you enjoy the race? Did it live up to the hype that you were anticipating? I know the first part of this race was really intriguing. Had some good moves and some not so good moves, and we had some strategy calls throughout this race that kind of led to some interesting situations and some potential, gotchas for some teams and some glory for some others. And I really enjoyed and I liked that Charles Leclerc won the race for Ferrari in the Ferrari's home race. So we got to see all of that Ferrari energy and emotion coming out at the end of this race. And that was really good to see. But for some reason, it didn't really live up to my hype, didn't live up to the passing that I was kind of wanted it to do, or the strategy calls that I was looking for. Maybe I'm just getting back into the rhythm of things, and so it's not quite on par with what I was hoping it would be. But in general, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. So a little bit above average, but not quite where I was hoping it was going to be after last week. And I know some people didn't like last week's, but I was really glad to get back into the swing of things. And so that made it a little bit better for me, I think, overall. But I will go through all of the drivers from last to first, kind of give you my ideas of what they did. And if anything happened to them and I know about it, I will let you know. So without further ado, I will start off from the last place, which was Yuki Tsunoda, who ended up having a rough time at the very beginning of this race. He was doing fairly decent. At the very, very start, he gained 2 spots at the very start of this race. But during all of the Haas and other issues that he had, I know Kevin Magnussen kind of hit him pretty solidly that ended up making him basically retire that car on lap 8, which kind of sucked for Yuki overall. I know he didn't have a good beginning, starting off in that 16th position instead of where he would love to be, up closer to that top 10 front, not even quite as close to his teammate Daniel Ricciardo as he would like to be, who started up in 12th. So he struggled a little bit in that qualifying session, but was coming to life in the race. Just got caught up in some other action and ended up causing some damage to that car that they decided that they had to retire that car fairly early. So he was the only DNF or did not finish in this race. So then we moved to Lance Stroll, who didn't have a very good race at all weekend, qualifying in 17th, ended up in 19th. He did a 3 pit stop race. I think the last one was to try to get some extra points for fastest lap, or just take that away from the people ahead of him, which didn't turn out to be the case. I do have him passing Franco Polienko on lap 7 for 15th, passing Juan Zhou on lap 42 for 15th. He did start off on a set of hards, like a few people, but only went to lap 19 on that set of hards before switching to mediums. Then went to lap 36 on those mediums, where he switched to another set of mediums and then switched to a set of hards on lap 50. So it was kind of a weird race for him. Didn't go anywhere. Didn't really have a good ability to get that Aston Martin where it needed to be. I know even Fernando Alonso was kind of struggling in that Aston Martin, but the difference between Fernando and Stroll is still significant. And so I think there was some issues with him or something going on, because they really kind of struggled for Lance Stroll. So a pretty poor race on Lance Stroll's point of view, in my view. So we'll have to get him to see if anything else happens. Can maybe come back next week. So we will see. Juan Zhou qualified in 20th, ended up in 18th. I don't have a whole lot going on for him. He did start off on mediums and went to lap 15 before switching to set of hards, and kind of was in that set of hards and didn't kind of go anywhere. I know that stick kick F1 car is not doing that great at all this part of the season. They're really struggling, and they really need to get some idea of what to do to improve that car. so they can even get a little bit more competitive in this back set and potentially squeeze out a point or two if something else happens. Unfortunately, that was not today, and it didn't look very good for Juan Yujo during this race. Nico Hulkenberg had a horrible time. He qualified in 10th and ended up in 17th. I have him basically passing Tsunoda on lap 4 for 15th, passing Franco on lap 5 for 15th, and then he had contact with Daniel, and he did get a nice penalty for that collision as well. So I mean, there was all that pushing people offline for Daniel off under the dirt, and so that's what he got a penalty for. But he really kind of struggled, and he ended up losing like 6 places at the very beginning of the race, which kind of ended up his race. I think they had some decision-making issues for Nico Hulkenberg as well, because he was coming around asking him questions about that front wing and whether it could be last or if they should go. And he started getting into the pits, excuse me, going into the pit lane before they called, and they said they were going to keep going, and then we're going to pit, I guess, just pit, box. So the decision kind of was made for the team, so they needed to be a little bit more on top of that at the very beginning to see what they were going to do with Nico. And I think since they brought him on lap 5, that kind of cost him, plus the 10-second penalty for driving someone off the track, made it worse, and they really could never gain back what they needed. As I said, he boxed on lap 5, switched from mediums to hards, went to lap 32 to another set of hards, and just kind of settled into that 17th position. Valtteri did fairly decent for being a stake F1 car, I thought. He qualified in 19th, which is not good, but he had some shines of brilliance in some of that earlier stages, but never did quite pull it off in the qualifying session. So he ended up in 19th to start the race, worked his way up to 16th, which is good to see. I have him basically going to lap 33 on a set of hards and then switching to a set of mediums, kind of staying in that variety, kind of working the tires, trying to work as much as he could. I didn't think they had a whole lot of shot to get up closer, and so it was a decent race for him, I think. I think he did all he could in that Stake F1 car to get it up to 16th. So I think he had a good race. It's just that Stake F1 car is not where it needs to be. And I said they need to figure out how to improve that. And hopefully with that new boss in line that they can kind of get things aligned to get some more improvements by the end of this season, potentially gearing up for next season. Pierre Gasly had a not so great race either, even though he was doing okay at the beginning. He qualified in 14th, ended up in 15th. He gained a position at the start of the race. He passed Juan Yujo on lap 43 for 16th position, and then kind of got worked back into that 15th. He did box on lap 10 to switch from those medium tires to a set of hard tires, went to lap 30 for another set of hard tires that made him go to the end. So kind of a weird combination. Really couldn't push those mediums as far as I think they would have liked in this stint to get him a little bit better run in this lineup. It just caused him a little bit more issues with the cars around him where he couldn't really make the ground that he needed to. So not a great race for either Alpine vehicle, but especially for Pierre Gasly as he dropped back a position. Whereas Esteban Ocon gained a position where he started off in 15th and ended up 14th ahead of his teammate, which is always what their main objective is for drivers, is try to beat their teammate to show that they're the best. And with him leaving the team for next year, I think he's trying to prove himself that he's worth that salt. So he didn't gain a position at the beginning of the race, so he kind of went long. He was on hard tires and went to lap 31 before switching to a set of mediums. Basically, I have him passing Tsunoda in lap 2 for 14th position, and that's all the information that I have on Esteban Ocon during all that craziness at the very beginning of the race and throughout the rest of the race. Kind of stayed out of the limelight, just kind of going around in their own race. not quite up to where they need to be to put pressure on those front runner mid-pack, but not falling back into the back of the clutches of like Stake or the bad collision and mistakes of Haas after their penalty. So kind of a mid run for us for Ocon, I think. Daniel Ricciardo qualified in 12th and ended up in 13th. I don't think it was the race that he wanted, and basically kind of shot it away with all the penalties that he got. And one of those was not really his fault, and it was kind of a bad call in the regard as just the pit. He got to get more into it, I should say. He was boxed at a lap 11 to switch from mediums to set of hards. And he was doing this. Mainly, he had a 5-second penalty for driving Hulkenberg off the track, and basically was doing that. The front wing person basically touched the wing, basically to steady the car when he shouldn't have touched the car at all. And so they basically rated it that he didn't. He failed to serve the penalty correctly, and so he was gained another 10-second penalty on top of that. So he ended up having a 15-second penalty in regards to his race, which really shot his race in the foot for the most part. But it was kind of just that touch. He realized that it was a mistake and took his hand off, but then they didn't wait long enough, I guess, after that to really serve the 5-second penalty correctly. And they didn't really do any, work on it. So it's kind of a catch-22, because it's like by the rules, it was not served, even though by, the flavor of the rule, it didn't happen. So I feel bad for the team member and the team in general for having that extra 10-second penalty put on Daniel, but it really put him into that 13th position overall. So not a great race for him. He did pass Gasly for 14th on lap 28 and passed Bottas on lap 29 for 13th position, and kind of was into that running, and then just had that 15-second across the full race where the 10-second was at the applied at the end that pushed him back into that 13th position in that regard. So kind of a shot in the foot for Daniel for pushing someone off track, and then it was compounded by the team not being the letter of the law aspects of that penalty. So a bad weekend for Daniel overall. That's basically what I can say. A decent weekend for Franco Colapinto. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm going to have to get used to saying his name. Ended up having a bad qualifying session, didn't quite get to where he wanted, so he ended up qualifying in 18th, worked his way up to 12th, did a good job of a full run on the F1 car after not having basically just 8 laps in an F1 car for the longest stint that he's run. So having a full race and weekend to be in that F1 car, I think he did a really good job in that, not pushing it too hard, not trying to, grandstand and say, hey, yes, I need to be in this car, even though he knows that he is not going to be available in that Williams next year. So that's really good, I think, for him to be calm and collective in this run and show what he can do for this possibility of him actually picking up a racing spot in the future. So I think he did a really good job there. And I actually have him passing Gasly on lap 30 for 15th position. He started off on a set of mediums and went to lap 16 and then switched to a set of hards that made him get to that 12th position. So overall, a good run for Franco. It's good to see him in the race. I was shocked at seeing that switch because I didn't think it really gained Williams anything per se to get rid of Logan and pull in a new driver, because I think that for having a new driver potentially would have the consequences of wrecking the car, and that's basically what they kind of got rid of Logan, because they thought he was doing too much damage, costing them too much money in repairs, and not getting them any points. And for pushing up a new driver mid-season, I don't see that going to really happen any better, I think. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll get closer to that point running in this and give him some points, and maybe not quite be as so destructive on the car, but that's a gamble for me to jump that person in there. I was expecting them to jump someone else that had a little bit more experience in there that would potentially give them a little bit better boost. But I like that Williams went back to their young driver program and pulled up someone from the young driver program, giving them that incentive to keep into that program, as even though they knew the driver's seats for William have been set for next year. So I'm happy to see that. I was just surprised that they did it this way. So a good run for Franco and a good position for Williams to put him in that position to show what he can do. Then we come in with Fernando Alonso, who qualified in 11th and ended up in 11th, and he really kind of struggled, pushed everything he could for this race, not getting where he needed to be to get quite into the points. Was kind of frustrated in this run with Aston Martin basically not having the car behind him to really able to push for those points. So you could tell on the radio where he was in that mindset. He did pass Bottas on lap 22 for 10th. On lap 27, he passed Ocon for 9th, passed Daniel Ricciardo on lap 47 for 11th. He started off on a set of mediums, went to lap 12, switched to a set of hards, went to lap 35, and went on to another set of hards. He did gain a position at the beginning of the race, but was able to, with all the pit stop strategies around him, basically get back to where he qualified in. So not quite where he wanted to be. He wanted to be into the points, try to push up forward, but was not quite able to do that. Still a decent run for him, but not where he wanted to be, not where that Aston Martin is looking for. Didn't get points again, so that's kind of putting more pressure on the whole team as the people around them are starting to gain some points. So the potentially of losing in a position in the constructors' standings, it's still there. So there's that extra bit of oomph, and there's not getting the ground that they were hoping to, I think, to push forward in that constructor's standing either. So that's going to be frustrating a little bit, but I think it was a decent job for Fernando in this race, considering that Aston Martin's performance this weekend. That gets us past the bottom 10, and so we get up to the top 10 where Kevin Magnussen actually got a point. He qualified in 13 and made it to 10th, even after he had the 10-second penalty. So that was good to see him actually getting points again. He was still kind of upset due to that collision penalty that he received. I think it was kind of his fault, but as he locked that tires up going into that corner, and that's basically what the stewards thought, is that because of that he didn't have complete control over his car when he hit Yuki Tsunoda side of his car around that corner, in really damaging that car, but allowing Kevin to continue on. Doing that, though, he gained another 2 points on his drivers. So that puts him in that 12-point range. So we'll have to see what they do next week, because he's supposedly, by the rule set, has a 12-point marker. So he has a race ban on him. So they'll have to figure out what they're going to, or who they're going to put into that Haas for the next race. He did make up for that in the sense that he was able to push forward and gain that point, even with that 10-second penalty. He did have quite a bit of action on track, where he passed Daniel Ricciardo on lap 11 for 11th, passed Gasly on lap 24 for 13th, passed Bottas on lap 26th for 12th, then passed Albon on lap 33 for that 9th position. Then got thrown back into that 10th position because of that 10-second penalty that he was on. So he had some good action in there, be able to be fairly fast and push forward from that 13th position. I know he's kind of frustrated on his qualifying session with his teammate qualifying up ahead of him. but it kind of worked out for him, I think, in this regard. He did gain a position at the very start of the race as well, so that helped him in that beginning. So he did start off on a set of mediums, went to lap 14 before switching to a set of hards. So a really good run for Kevin, even though he got the penalty. So he's getting kind of banned for the next race. So we'll have to wait and see what word comes from Haas on who's going to replace him in that vehicle for him. And hopefully they can work something out. Can do some good work for Kevin while he's out. Alex Albon actually did a really good race. Qualified in 9th and ended up in 9th. He probably would have been 10th, except for that penalty that Kevin Magnussen had. He did pass Bottas on lap 25 for 11th. He did start on a set of mediums, so went to lap 17 before switching to a set of hards. He said it was kind of in his own race, kind of with Kevin Magnussen ahead of him, trying to keep that gap because he knew he had the 10-second penalty, trying to keep that on him when Alonso was coming up behind him as well. So it's kind of in that weird position at the end of the race where he was trying to maintain the gap from Alonso, but keep it underneath the 10-second window for Kevin so that he could jump him in the end of the race. So that was kind of his strategy, even though he was kind of mostly by himself. So a good run for Alex Albon, getting more points for Williams, which is always good to see in that running. See if they can actually put some more pressure in the constructor standings, but they have a little ways to go. Sergio Perez qualified in 8th and ended up in 8th. Both Red Bulls were kind of frustrated this weekend where they were not performing, couldn't quite get the balance going on those Red Bulls, and so they were struggling all weekend. And I was thinking that they were going to kind of figure it out by the race, but it didn't quite turn out that way. And from the interviews, it sounded like from Max that they had to turn down some of the engine qualities of this race, so they couldn't actually run to the full performance of that Red Bull anyway. So that hurt them overall as well. So we'll have to see if they can fix things before the next race, because if they keep this state up, they'll be dropping that constructor's position, and they don't want to see that, and potentially make that driver standing a little bit more competitive if Max keeps ending up farther back in the pack than 1 or 2. So we'll have to see how Red Bull handles that. But Sergio Perez did a decent job in this race. He didn't gain positions, but he didn't lose any positions at the start of the race. He passed Russell on lap 11 for 7th. He passed Ocon on lap 25 for 9th. And then he passed Kevin Magnussen on lap 44 for 8th. So he got himself back up into that running. He started off on a set of hards, went to lap 23 for another set of hards, went to lap 35 before switching to a set of mediums for the rest of the race. Decent run, just not the great run that Red Bull is looking for both team members. So he was probably hoping that he could get past George Russell in that last stint, but was not quite able to catch up to him in that running. Speaking of George Russell, he qualified in 3rd and ended up in 7th. I know he had some issues at the very beginning of the race. Had to swap out that wing at the first pit stop because of that front end plate, which he kind of ended up getting pushed out wide, and then was going through the barriers to get around and clipped one of those styrofoam barriers, which damaged that front wing end plate on his car, which then cost him some performance. Then he had a little longer pit stop because of that wing change before getting back out. So even with that, I think he did a good job in this race. Not quite where you'd like to be. And without that, I think he could have been pushing up a little bit closer to that 3rd position, getting past Carlos potentially at the end of this race. But with that damage and some of that issues that he had getting pushed out, losing some time at the beginning of the race, it just didn't work out for him. He did lose 4 positions at the start of the race because of all of that fun stuff going on, but he worked his way back up. He did start off on a set of mediums, went to lap 11 before switching to a set of hards till lap 33, where he switched to another set of hards. He passed Alonso on lap 14 for 15th, passed Bottas on lap 21 for 9th, passed Ocon on lap 26 for 8th, passed Daniel Ricciardo on lap 30 on lap 37 for 10th, passed Perez on lap 39 for 8th, and passed K-Mag on lap 42 for 7th. So he was working while he's back up into the field, had some good action on track. I'm sure he had some fun in that regard, but didn't really come out on top. And I know he's probably frustrated from that beginning of the race, getting clipped, getting pushed out, and doing that damage to his front wing. So that's basically what caused him the trouble. He did do a decent job of trying to recover from that damage. So I think he did a good job in general. If he had kind of kept it more clean at the very beginning, I would have really been shine a little bit more for him. Max Verstappen started in 7th and ended up in 6th. He did gain a position at the start of the race. He did pass Ocon on lap 24 for 6th. And then he went to lap 22 on a set of hards, and then went to lap 41 before he switched to another set of mediums to end the race. So he did a 2-stop race. He kind of locked himself in fairly early on that lap 22 to that second set by putting on a second set of hards. So the teams around them kind of knew what they were going for, and they really didn't have the performance. Didn't sound like, and they were struggling in the race. So I think they did a good job for Max to even gain a position up to that 6th position. So he did what he could, gained a position, kept the damage as little as possible. At one point, when Lando ended up coming out of the pits behind Max, he was able to hold up Lando as well, so that kind of minimized some of that damage that Lando was going to do in that that driver standing with him. So I think overall, Max did everything he could in that ailing Red Bull this weekend. So that Red Bull has kind of been going down. So hopefully they can figure out what's going on and right that ship and start pushing that, getting a little bit more competitive, getting that front runner spots back again. Lewis Hamilton qualified in 6th and ended up in 5th. He did a really good job, I think, overall. He gained a position at the start of the race. He passed Stroll on lap 18 for 8th. He went to lap 15 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, and then switched to another set of hards on lap 37. So he kind of had that 2-stop race, but kind of ran in that running. Pretty good run in that Mercedes for Lewis Hamilton. Not quite where he needed to be to put a whole lot of pressure on Carlos in that 4th position, but still a good run for Mercedes, who's kind of coming back into this fight slowly but surely. I think they're trying to figure out that Mercedes and how to manage each weekend and get better and better. So we'll have to keep an eye on those Mercedes throughout the rest of the season to see if they start hindering those teams that are kind of at that back of that front pack in this run. Carlos Sainz qualified in 5th and ended up in 4th. He gained a position at the start of the race and was kind of silent for the most part in this race, not having to fight a whole lot of positions. He did go to lap 19 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards and went the rest of the way on that set of hards. And because of that, he wasn't able to maintain that second position, where the McLarens had that newer rubber and were able to catch up to him and pass him in that stint. So he dropped back down to 4th, even though he had that 1 stop, and his teammate was able to maintain that first spot. But I think he did his job for a Ferrari teammate fairly well and trying to hold up the McLarens as much as possible to let Charles keep that first position and win the race. So that was a really good run for Carlos as a team. I know he was hoping probably to be a little bit higher in the field, but I think he did a great team run for this, getting through this run, doing everything he can for his teammate to maintain that first position overall. So good job for Carlos Sainz. Lando was really hurting this weekend after this race. He did a really good job. Got on pole position. So he started off in first position, ended up finishing the race in third. He had a good start, maintained the lead. Thought he was probably thinking, yes, I made the first corner. I didn't lose the lead on the first corner. And then his teammate came in on turn 4 and just kind of went to the outside. Really awesome pass, but also a very dangerous pass, I think. And I don't think Lando was quite expecting that pass to happen, especially with the two McLarens trying to put pressure on the Red Bulls for the driver's standing and the constructor's standing, because that could have potentially knocked both of those McLarens out. So I think they need to have a talk, even though it was an awesome pass that happened. But I think that caused some issues within the team, and then they didn't kind of capitalize on all of this to get back into that first and second position, because they were trying to concentrate too much on other things, and I think they just kind of opened the door, even though they weren't expecting Ferrari to be able to make a one-stop work. They ended up losing track of that, and so they didn't put enough emphasis on that possibility. So they were kind of concentrating on other things, I think, on their pit stops, in their tire conservation strategies. So in that regard, I think McLaren really let down, and I think they needed to really step back and think of how they want to proceed. I'm kind of like Will Buxton on this. I think they've had a while to get their head in the game, and they keep kind of making these bad mistakes, and so they're shooting themselves in the foot for the strategies that's happening around them. But a good run for Lando, even though he came in third. He did lose 2 spots on that first lap, which is not good, but he did get the fastest lap to try to claw back an extra point. In that regard, he did pass Ocon on lap 15 for 8th, passed Max on track on lap 41 for 4th, and that hurt him a little bit trying to get back past Max. So the team should have had him out a little bit before that, put a little too much pressure on him to try to get him on track. And he passed Sainz on lap 48 for 3rd. He went to lap 14 on a medium set of tires before switching to a set of hards, and then went to lap 32 before switching to another set of hards. And I know he said his front left tire was way worn out, more than he was expecting it to be, and I think they could have kind of worked on that through that race. A good race for Lando, even though it didn't look that way, I don't think, in regard. He probably could have done a little bit better on tire management. I think he's probably frustrated trying to keep up with his teammate and trying to push that on his side, not doing the concentration that quite what he needed to do. And you kind of see that when he was coming into the pits and barely making the speed limit and kind of clipping the Bolliard on the in pit lane. So I think you could kind of see some of that frustration in him, and I know he's seriously disappointed of being able to be on pole and then fall all the way back to 3rd in that run. But I don't think it's quite as bad of a drive as that looks in general, but it is very more an issue for the team than for Lando. They need to figure out how to rein these two drivers in to basically get the most out of the McLarens in this last 9 races, to really maximize what they can do in that McLaren and put the most pressure they can on the Red Bulls in general. And Ferrari's going to come up and sneak up behind them if they're not careful as well. So they're going to have to watch out for that. Oscar, he did an excellent job. He qualified in second, ended up in second. I know he was frustrated and said he was hurting quite a bit for losing that position to Charles Leclerc in this run, because he was thinking that he had it after he got past his teammate on that turn 4 run. He was thinking he was going to be able to maintain that gap and just take off with it. But he wore his tires out. He was not able to really, I know they put the question to him and he didn't think he was going to be able to easily do that one stop. And since the Ferraris had that potential ability to do it. They said that if that dropped down, they'd just drop down to third, so it would be really nothing to lose for the Ferraris. It kind of hurt the McLarens in that decision making for them. They ended up going for the two-stop, and that basically cost them the win of the race, as well as serious points, I think, in the driver's standings for not having good driver rules. I know they were saying don't touch each other, but you can race, which is always good for the fans, but not very good for the team in general. I think you're going to get some frustrated drivers with Lando, and if it keeps up, you may end up losing one or both of those drivers to other teams as see their chance to gain slip away from them because of those lack of team orders in general. I think I know it's frustrating to have team orders, but in those situations, like Will Buxton said, they only happen every once in a while. You need to grasp them with both hands. So I think that's going to hurt them in the end. But he had a good race, excellent pass on his teammate. He took the lead on turn 4 on that first lap. He was able to pass Sainz on lap 45 for that second position to gain as much ground as he could after those pit stops, and Charles Leclerc not pitting. So kind of sliding behind him, trying to gain that time back, but not quite able to gain the time that he needed back on Charles Leclerc to put really any kind of super pressure on him, being behind him for the pass. There was still, of course, a lot of pressure on that Charles Leclerc not to make mistakes and not to run the tires out and just kill him. But overall, there wasn't that direct pressure from Oscar on Charles Leclerc at the end, which we kind of wanted to see, I think. He went to lap 16 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, then went to lap 38 for another set of hards. And of course, he gained that position at the start of the race from his teammate, and so that kind of led him to that second position overall. So an excellent run for him, even though I don't think it's the best spot for McLaren to be in that situation. I think they should have had Lando up there, gaining as many points as they could and putting maybe a little bit more pressure on Charles Leclerc. You never know. So there's a lot to think and talk about with the McLaren strategy and that ability for them to really consider themselves a champion run. So they really kind of need to get their heads and figure out what they want to do in the future. And then you have Charles Leclerc, who qualified in 4th and ended up in 1st. He ended up getting driver of the day, which I can see awesomely. He ended up pitting on lap 15 from a set of mediums, and they were thinking that they were messing up. Well, he was thinking they were messing up in this run because it was they got undercut, and they were thinking, wait, we're not really in this race. But then he kind of kept them in that, so went a really long distance on that set of hard tires that allowed him to maintain that first position overall by not pitting again. So there was an awesome strategy, awesome driver ability, and team radio conversations to really keep that tire alive as much as possible to keep that first position in this run. So I think he did an excellent job. I think Ferrari did an excellent job for once to maintain that first position and do it, get that point, get the championship run, winning in their home race for Ferrari, having all that emotion behind them, not letting that get to them in this setup. So excellent job for Charles Leclerc. I have him basically taking second from Lando on lap 1, and then was stuck behind Oscar for a little while, but was able to get out in front and just get some clean air, and was able to maintain those tires and go the rest of the way. So excellent job for Charles Leclerc in this run. I cannot believe that he was able to kind of keep that all together on his head and make that happen and take advantage of the issues that McLaren was having in the team battle conversations that they're looking at. So excellent job for Charles Leclerc. That gets us through the race. What did that do for the driver standing? So we basically have Alexander Albon getting his 2 points and making him jump over Esteban Ocon for 17th position. Kevin Magnussen was getting that point, so he is still tied with Alexander Albon, but ahead of him, but yet still behind Oliver Behrman, who is in 15th. Then you basically have the same standard run. You had Lando gaining points on Max, and of course Charles gaining a little bit more on Lando as well. So there's still a little bit of battle there with that 30-ish points in that running, and still a possibility of Lando getting first in the driver standings, but it's going to be a little harder as we go through the last several races if we keep this up. But pretty much a standard race, kind of just shifting a little bit of points here and there. And for the constructor standings, we still have Red Bull at 446 points, but we have McLaren gaining ground quite a bit for 438. So there's only a few points between that second and first position. So we're going to probably see a change in the next several races. But as I said earlier, the Ferrari is only basically 30 points behind the McLaren. So if they're not careful and they keep kind of fumbling around, they may end up losing that first position or that second position to Ferrari as well. So there's some issues there that could be worked on and dealt with. They still need to be concerned with Ferrari in this run. They can't just concentrate on Red Bull entirely. Then you gained a little bit of ground with the Mercedes, but they're still kind of on their own with that 292 points. And you have Aston Martin kind of in the same boat, and that fifth position kind of locked in with 74. RB still has 34, but Haas gained a point, gaining a little bit of ground on them, so there's still that chance of Haas being able to overtake RB for that sixth position. And then, of course, Williams gaining a couple of points, so they're starting to put pressure on Alpine again. So we'll have to see if that happens. And, of course, Stake not gaining a point yet this season, and at this point, it's going to be hard for them to do that, but there's still that possibility they can gain a point and not be pointless for this run. So, what is coming up next? Of course, we have the Azerbaijan on September 15th, or the Baku race. So we have a week off, and then we come back in and race at Baku. I always kind of like this race in general. So we'll have to see how that plays out and see if we can get some drivers' championships going and see if that constructor's position changes during this race. It was first introduced in 2016, and it has a length of 3.73 miles with a total laps of 51 being run. So a total race distance of 190.17 miles. And Charles Leclerc is the lap record holder from 2019 with 1 minute 43.009 seconds. So a really good run for them. And if you made it this far, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe to help fight that pesky algorithms that they go through. And if you want to see my reaction to the Baku race, especially subscribe so you'll get those notifications or be able to see some of that information as it happens. Until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.